rare and balanced view on politics in today's world. Based on facts, born of rationality, common sense, and logic, providing context on today's events. This is American Perspective with Rick Thomas.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to American Perspective. I am your host, Rick. Oh, we're getting closer and closer to the holidays. Christmas Eve is next week. Next week, that's right. Can you believe it's almost Christmas? I mean, I get so excited for this holiday, and unfortunately for this year, it seems like things have gone by so dang quickly. The reason being, of course, is because we as a family decided to wait for a week after Thanksgiving in order to decorate, get the Christmas tree, so on and so forth. And so it just seems like it's going so quick. It's going so fast. Of course, it also goes fast. The older you get, you tend to, go through time. Time tends to speed up versus when you're a kid. When you're a kid, time is takes forever. When you're a kid, it seems like summer vacation is so long. It's only, 2 months or whatever, but it's just so long and so on and so forth. But anyway. 3 Chevy points out, rule number 1, decorating starts the weekend of Thanksgiving. Well, I'm close. Rule number 1 in this house is no Christmas until after Thanksgiving. Much to my wife's and daughter's chagrin. At least my son kind of picked it up. Anyway, all right, folks, let's go ahead and get things started tonight. Tonight we have... For the Pledge of Allegiance, we have G. G will be reciting the pledge for us. So, if you would, please, if you are of mind, please stand, remove your hat if you're wearing one, and make sure to place your hand over your heart and follow along with G in the recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And, of course, I thank you, G, for submitting that wonderful rendition of the pledge. If you would like to hear your rendition of the pledge played here on the program, all you need to do is record yourself performing it. Take that audio or video file, whatever kind of file you use to record it, and attach it to an email and send it off to fans, F-A-N-S, at AmericanPerspective.online. That's fans, F-A-N-S, at AmericanPerspective.online. And for tonight's headline sponsor, here they are, theflagshirt.com. That's right, theflagshirt.com. I'm wearing one of their wonderful one of their cotton polos, I should say, shirts right here on the program. This is the Declaration of Independence polo. Yeah. And so go and check out theflagshirt.com and take a look at all of their offerings. They've got a happy holidays. I hate that. That's unfortunately, I am going to ding them for this, but I don't like happy holidays. It's Merry Christmas, people. It's Merry Christmas, all right? Anyway, they say happy holidays to everybody from the Flag Shirt. Trying to keep PC. I get it. But anyway, if you want to go over there and pick something up, they have free shipping on $75 of on orders of $75 or more. They will give you free shipping. That's a standard thing from them. But hey, I understand not too many people are able to spend $75 or more at one particular store, especially this time of year, unless, of course, you're getting them for gifts. So I get it. So what I think you should do, and I'm going to help you out here, but what I think you should do is you should head on over to flagshirt.americanperspective.online. That's flagshirt.americanperspective.online, and you will grab, or be presented with, I should say, a coupon code that you can copy and paste into the promo code box at checkout at theflagshirt.com and get yourself $5 off your order. Go to flagshirt.americanperspective.online to grab that coupon code and paste it into the promo code box at checkout at theflagshirt.com and get $5 off your order. Go to go to theflagshirt.com and get yourself patriotized. All right. Well, I never, I kind of thought I wouldn't have seen this this year, considering the fact that Donald Trump won the popular vote, the electoral votes, as well as the House and the Senate being all in Republican control. I kind of thought I wouldn't see this because this kind of comes back every single presidential cycle, especially when the Democrats lose, but in particular when the Democrats lose the electoral vote and not the popular vote. Now, this year, because Trump won the popular vote, you kind of are sitting there and thinking to yourself, okay, maybe they're not going to talk about this too much. Well, I was wrong. I was completely wrong. Because apparently the Democrats are proposing a constitutional amendment to abolish the Electoral College. Once again. Okay, let's be honest. We know that's not going anywhere because the Republicans, I doubt, are going to do anything with that. But it's kind of interesting that they are back arguing about this. Now, there was one social media post on X where this person was claiming, I don't know how rightfully so this claim was, but they were claiming that three states decided the essential victory. And they even broke it down and said something like there was only 250,000 votes or whatever out of those three states. Now, I don't understand. Again, this is part of my problem, my issue with Democrats and their lack of logic, their lack of reasoning. But the Electoral College doesn't have much in the way of connection to the popular vote. So why they continually try to connect the popular vote to the electoral vote system or the electoral process is beyond me. Because again, our government, for as long as it's been around, okay, the electoral vote system and the electoral process has been the only way to elect the presidency. There has never been a time where we were using the popular vote. And there's a specific reason for that. Two reasons actually, but one is that they wanted to create a system that made it fair across the board, regardless of state size necessarily and population. What they also did is they wanted to avoid what the founding fathers called pure democracy. Now, by pure democracy, that means every person has a vote, casts a vote, and that vote will then count toward whatever the final tally is. So in other words, if you get over half of the vote, even just by one, it's automatically that's the winner. And it goes by essentially majority rules in a pure democracy. The problem with that, of course, is that, and the founders knew this by studying many different forms of government that were available and developed back then, they figured out that pure democracy turns into mob rule. that a majority rule isn't necessarily the fairest way to go, because of course once the majority is in that's it. It basically might as well become a dictatorship at that point. And here in the United States, we have essentially 5 or 6 states that are completely outweighing the others in terms of population. In other words, what you end up with is California and New York and Illinois will outweigh the votes that come from Texas and Florida. And so with the idea of a popular vote system, those three states, and let's be honest, it's not even those 3 states, but it's the populated cities within those states that would actually determine the presidency every single year. And I've had these conversations on social media. I've had these conversations personally with people. The electoral system, while not perfect, is at this point the best system that has been devised, where the people have essentially a vote in the process. Now, here's the one recommendation that I would say moving forward, if they want to try and change this process, okay? If they want to change this process, the one thing I would recommend, if you want to try and make it, because this is what the Democrats are arguing, is that, well, you know, my vote doesn't count, okay? Well, here's the thing, is that if you want to make your vote count and you really want to bring it down to how close you can get to any one individual vote, okay, you break it down like this. Make it so that 48 states, actually, let's just make it all 50, but you make the 48 that do winner take all, you force them into more of a system like what Nebraska and Maine have. Meaning that whatever the county votes, or in this case, it would be the congressional district, whatever the congressional district votes for is where that congressional district's singular vote goes toward the electoral vote system. So that means that you would no longer have blue states or red states. Everything would be purple in terms at the state level. But if you broke it down into the congressional district level, what would end up happening is each congressional district would lean either Republican or Democrat, depending upon how you wanted to go, and you'd end up with maps like what you're seeing nowadays. Instead of seeing states like Washington, Oregon, and California being all blue, okay, they would turn into being blue around the cities, and everywhere else in the rural areas would be considered red. Now, you'd still have some states like New York, potentially. I mean, New York is actually still a little bit more of a purple state once you get out of New York City. But you might have states like Rhode Island, Connecticut, Maryland, Virginia that for the most part would be blue across the board. But realistically, that number of actual states would no longer be all one color. And it would be more reflective of the idea of, hey, does my vote count? Now, unfortunately for all of that, the Constitution does state that outside of a couple of exceptions, it's the state legislatures that are in charge of the elections. So you would have to go around to every single state and get that change made. Unless, of course, you did a constitutional amendment in order to make it that way. But I think that would be a non-starter, just like this electoral college abolishment idea, which comes around every single 4 years and is not going to go hardly anywhere, at least not in my opinion. And yeah, Senator Dick Durbin, who this is the photo of him. If you're on the audio portion of the program, you got to check it out at rumble.com or X or any of my other outlets. But Dickie Durbin says that it is time to retire this 18th century invention that disenfranchises millions of Americans. Well, that's because he is a complete effing moron in terms of how the electoral process works and how we make sure that we count all the votes. Because think of it this way. If we got rid of the electoral college process, now it would no longer necessarily be states that were validating your vote. It would actually be the nation itself that would be validating your individual vote or packages of votes. Because if we went to a 100% popular vote system, then a state of Texas could, in fact, even though they got shot down in 2020, they could, in fact, state that Pennsylvania screwed the pooch on the vote system, and it would just create a nightmare of legal challenges and everything else that's going on with with the entire system. Plus, not to mention the fact, but think about this. How long did we have to wait until California finished its freaking counting? How long did we have to wait? 3 weeks? A month? A month and 2 weeks? I don't even remember. But just imagine if the national vote, the popular vote, was utilized. We would never, ever, ever get to a point where we could have all of the votes counted in one day in order to find out who our president actually is. Because believe me, if we can't do it now, just imagine what would happen if it came down to that kind of a scenario. So this is ridiculous. I mean, it's essentially going to be. I mean, again, you can't change it without a constitutional amendment, and for that you need 2/3 of the Congress, meaning 2/3 of each house, has to approve the amendment, along with 3/4 of the states as it stands, in order to get it to be ratified and put into play. So yeah, it's gonna get it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So anyway, that of course has come out again. Not to mention the fact that the 14th Amendment and Section 3 of the 14th has been tossed around by a bunch of morons over on the socials talking about it. Even though there was no insurrection, there's nothing that they can do about it. They just can't let it go. These morons can't let it go. Something like, by the way, the Russia hoax. Now, I talked about the IG report that came out with regards to January 6th. And the FBI having confidential human sources, 26 of them, in fact, in the crowd, okay, and 3 had entered the Capitol. That's what the report said. Well, there's another IG report that has come out. Now, for those of you who don't know, IG stands for Inspector General, all right? And this Inspector General report that also came out was talking about the DOJ's surveillance of Congress in regards to the whole Russia hoax. Well, the Federalist, here's the piece. The Federalist put together an interesting correlation between the IG's report and the particular news articles that came out during said time period. And he came up with some interesting correlations. So the first one is that the Department of Justice's Inspector General released a report on some of the DOJ's tracking of communications from media and congressional figures as part of its purported investigation into who was leaking classified information against Donald Trump back in 2017. Now think about this. We're now into 2024, and they're just now giving out a report on something that happened back in 2017. You think that we're going to know anything about January 6th for probably another 4 or 5 years? Yeah. Anyway, in this piece, Molly Hemingway pops out this wonderful statement. 3 significant bombshells about the Russia collusion hoax were hidden inside the dense and dry 100-page report. Now, just to give you kind of a quick background, and she does this in the piece, she says, for context, when Trump won the 2016 presidential election, anonymous Democrat operatives in the federal government and Congress began leaking like sieves as part of a coordinated effort to paint Trump as a mastermind spy who had worked with Russian President Vladimir Putin for decades in order to steal the election. There were 2 Washington Post stories, a New York Times story, and a CNN story that were all found to have included classified information. Now, none of the 4 stories are actually specified in the report, but they all appeared in the first half of President Trump's first year in office. So, the first Washington Post story came out in April of 2017 by 3 individuals, and it was revealing that the DOJ had gotten a FISA warrant to spy on Carter Page. All right. The true story of that warrant would end up revealing the corruption of the DOJ, including how it had falsified evidence in its application and relied on the laughable Steele dossier as its basis, which was paid for by Hillary Clinton and the DNC, by the way. But at the time of its publication, the FISA story suggested that an honorable DOJ had serious reason to suspect the Trump campaign of colluding with Russia to steal the election. Now, it continues down and kind of finishes off the synopsis of what's going on. I'm going to skip some of that. But here is the first bombshell that came out of the report. One of the more aspiring claims in the report was that a Democrat staffer on one of the congressional committees voluntarily told the FBI almost immediately after the investigation began in 2017 that he suspected 2 members of Congress and a number of Democrat staffers of being involved in leaking the classified information, leading to further investigation of those identified. Now, the report doesn't actually identify the whistleblower, the committee, or name the members of Congress. However, a 2021 New York Times story had already identified then Representative Adam Schiff and Representative Eric Swalwell, both of California, as the 2 congressmen on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence who were under investigation. So the DOJ report further notes that only these 2 members of Congress were being investigated. Schiff was the top Democrat on the HPSCI at the time. Its Republican chair, Devin Nunes, was engaged in painstaking efforts to reveal the Russian collusion hoax and many of its participants. Now, both Schiff and Swalwell, if you remember back in the day, both of them were notorious for going on left-wing media outlets such as CNN, as well as MSNBC, and to push the Russian collusion story. Okay? Now, Schiff is still doing it. He was censured for it falsely claiming to have secret evidence substantiating the hoax. I mean, how this guy ended up back in the Senate, I have no idea. I really don't. But all of that being the case, Swalwell, of course, we don't forget that he banged Chinese spy Fang Fang. He banged Fang Fanged. Anyway, and she obviously targeted him and the other Democrats as part of a honey trap operation. So, anyway, so that's the first bombshell. Now, let me correlate this for just a second. As you recall, there are a series of Democrats, in particular, Adam Schiff and Eric Swalwell, who have been proposed to be pardoned by Joe Biden before he takes off and gets out of office in January. Could it be that they are trying to head off being investigated for these lies and this leaking of classified info, which we know is a federal offense because they've tried to prosecute Trump for it, even though he has declassification powers. And they conveniently decided not to prosecute Joe Biden for the same thing. Now, next bombshell. There was a top Democrat staffer who was caught communicating with 3 reporters who had published the classified info that he had access to. But the FBI didn't think it meant much. Yeah, the FBI just chose to not go after it. Well, the IG report itself says the whistleblower identified a top Democrat staffer from the same committee as a potential leaker. The report notes that the DOJ focused its investigation on the senior committee staffer as a potential source for the leak, and that beyond being identified by the whistleblower, he was someone they suspected of being the source of the unauthorized disclosure for other reasons as well. Now, the IG report doesn't name the senior staffer. However, another 2021 New York Times story identifies the suspected leaker. The leak investigation appears to have been primarily focused on Michael Bahar, then a staff member on the House Intelligence Committee. Russian collusion hoaxers Michael Schmidt and Charlie Savage wrote, "It remains unclear whether agents were pursuing a theory that Mr. Bahar had leaked on his own or whether they suspected him of talking to reporters with the approval of lawmakers. Either way, it appears they were unable to prove their suspicions that he was the source of any unauthorized disclosures. The case has been closed and no charges were brought." So it's unclear if the DOJ was unable, or perhaps more likely, according to the piece, unwilling to go after the participants in the Russian collusion hoax that it helped run. Now, we continue down the road here. They obtained phone records, learned that they showed that immediately before accessing the read room, which is a room inside the skiff to read the stuff, and continuing through shortly after publication of the articles containing the relevant classified information, the senior committee staffer's phone number was in contact with telephone numbers used by all 3 of the reporters who authored the articles that disclosed the classified information. Yeah. Anyway, that seems like a big deal. Here comes bombshell number 3, which is, of course, that the DOJ spied on as many Republicans as they did Democrats when investigating these Democrat leaks. Why would they be going after the Republicans if it's the Democrats were the leakers? So apparently the IG report shows a surprisingly high number of congressional staff that had their communications monitored secretly by the DOJ. By the way, that's Kash Patel is a part of that. As part of the investigation into who was leaking classified information to hurt Republicans. A look into who the DOJ was monitoring suggests the investigation was never done in good faith. In other words, of the 43 congressional staffers who were monitored, 21 worked for Democrats and 20 worked for Republicans. Another 2 worked in nonpartisan positions. At the time that the leak investigation began, the thing notes, or the article notes, Republicans in the HPSCI were famously battling against the Russian collusion conspiracy theory, while Democrats were loudly pushing it. Yet investigators decided that they'd surveil both Republicans and Democrats equally because the lead career prosecutor said, because the leakers' motivations are unknown, prosecutors must explore all possibilities and cannot assume political motives one way or the other. Yeah. That same career prosecutor also added that the Carter Page FISA story was a good example of that principle because both parties had potential political motivations to leak the information. Yeah. Anyway. So, that's Schiff, Shifty Schiff, Shifty Shifty Schiff, and, of course, Eric Fang Fang Swalwell. Or, I should say, Eric Bang Bang Fang Fang Swalwell. Mr. Flatulence himself. Now, let's move beyond the Russia hoax. There's another big event that they could be looking at potentially bringing legal charges against individuals. That being the January 6th committee. Now, just recently, here in the Populist Times, Senator Mike Lee calls out Liz Cheney in particular over potential cover-up of FBI's role in January 6th. Now, you remember I told you that IG report investigating January 6th said that there were 26 confidential human sources within the crowd on January 6th. The problem here is that Liz Cheney and the select committee, or as Donald Trump likes to call them, the unselect committee, they were asked specifically about those confidential human sources. And in fact, so was the FBI. Director Wray was brought up on Capitol Hill to answer the question. And none of them said that they existed. In fact, Liz Cheney wanted to avoid those questions. Oh, we can't forget Adam Kinzinger over there as well. So Mike Lee, of course, calls out former Representative Liz Cheney's knowledge of the FBI informants among January 6 protesters, where Cheney lashed out at anybody asking whether the FBI had inside sources and scope of their involvement. Here he notices a post or notes a post on X with regards to what's going on here. He says, Liz Cheney called me a nutball conspiracy theorist for asking questions about the FBI's involvement on January 6th. The DOJ Inspector General's report confirmed that I had good reasons to ask these questions, which Christopher Wray repeatedly dodged. So, yeah. And as I pointed out, the new report by the Justice Department Inspector General Michael Horowitz disclosed that the agency had 26 informants among the protesters. Interestingly, the agency had directed only 3 of the human assets to actually attend the protests, bringing the contribution of the rest into question. The report also says the remaining 23 agents traveled on their own initiative and were not tasked by the FBI to do so. Yeah. Well, further on down, Brian Fournier points out that Liz Cheney, if Liz Cheney did indeed destroy 117 files related to the January 6th committee, that is highly illegal, and she should be arrested. So Liz Cheney, who was sort of asking for a pardon from Joe Biden, is also potentially on the chopping block here in terms of, oh, what the heck is going on? So the question, of course, did she know that what Mr. Horowitz put out recently, did she know about this? If so, why was she up there calling into question the sanity of anyone even raising the questions about the FBI involvement on January 6th? Well, it's a little bit further too, also, that apparently, and I knew this, I know a lot of people knew this, but Liz Cheney was in contact with Cassidy Hutchinson without Cassidy Hutchinson's lawyer, and it was a ex parte communication outside of the system between Liz Cheney and Cassidy Hutchinson discussing the committee. And here are the texts, or at least copies of the texts that showed up. Could it be that Liz Cheney could be brought up on charges for witness tampering as well? Methinks so. And if that's the case, that would be why Liz Cheney is shaking in her boots, because Kash Patel is not going to give these people any quarter in all of this. Well, before I get on to the next piece of this wonderful puzzle, I do have to point out that, by the way, folks, oops, my chat is going nuts right now. I don't know why, but they are. Something's going on with Bonnie. I have no idea, but Bonnie's like, supposedly, at least the report by Fat Paws is that she is laughing so hard she's rolling around on the ground. So obviously I'm missing something. But anyway. And apparently Braden McGroin is saying that Keystone Light makes his clothes fall off. I don't know. Anyway, my chat just goes crazy at times. I don't know. Anyway, all right, let's get back into it. All right. Well, there's one more person on the January 6th committee that appears to be begging, or at least privately begging, for a pardon as well. And that is the chairman, Benny Thompson. So he was recently, and this is in Armstrong Economics, this article. So he was recently asked and recently confirmed the fact that he would accept a preemptive pardon from Joe Biden if it were offered to him. Okay. Now, the key about this is that Thompson hasn't really been accused of a crime yet. So, the question is, why? What is he hiding? Now, there is an interesting case called Burdick versus, Burdick. There we go. Burdick versus the United States back in 1915, that as a part of that, the case, the opinion that was written on that case declared that accepting a pardon is actually an admission of guilt. It said, quote, "There are substantial differences between legislative immunity and a pardon. The latter carries the imputation of guilt and an acceptance of a confession of it, while the former, meaning legislative immunity, is non-committal and tantamount to silence of the witness. Legislation declares there is a distinction between an amnesty and a pardon. The former, which is the amnesty, overlooks the offense and is usually addressed to crimes against the sovereignty of the state and political offenses, while as the pardon remits punishment and condones infractions of the peace of the state. So that's the key. That's the key, is that a pardon and the acceptance of it is considered to be an admission of guilt of some kind of crime. And we all know the most recent pardon came from Joe Biden to Hunter Biden that caused a lot of this. And what ended up happening in all of this is, of course, if Hunter accepts the accepts the pardon, he basically says, because it's a blanket pardon, that I actually committed crimes between 2014 and 2024. And that's essentially what they're saying here. So the deep state, of course, if they preemptively pardon the committee, in the case Donald Trump prosecutes these people, by the way, as the left has relentlessly done to him over the past 4 years, that pardoning Bernie Thompson would also likely result in a pardon for Liz Cheney, as both have allegedly destroyed evidence surrounding the January 6th case. So if they take pardons, if they accept the pardons, that means they're guilty, folks. Because why would you accept a pardon if you have no reason to accept it? So Trump said recently in an interview that Cheney did something that's inexcusable, along with Thompson and the people on the unselect committee of political thugs and, creeps. They deleted and destroyed all evidence, and Cheney was behind it, and so was Benny Thompson, as well as everybody on that committee, for what they did. Honestly, they should go to jail. And while, as Buddy points out, that an investigative committee is not a criminal court where it can't issue judgment against things, the destruction of any evidence that they created, though, could very well be a crime. And especially destroying that evidence could be considered obstruction in the Supreme Court defined version of the term, which is that would be considered obstruction based on the Sarbanes-Oxley definition, which is where that whole obstruction charge came from that got overturned by the Supreme Court on the January 6ers. Because it was misapplied. Anyway, so both Cheney and Thompson, of course, maintain their innocence. Cheney also maintains that Trump attempted to overthrow the 2020 U.S. presidential election to seize power like a crazed dictator. She is wrong. She's totally wrong. She's off her rocker. There was no insurrection. Trump had nothing to do with it. He didn't do any of that stuff. And so, anyway. Cheney's a moron. But deleting and destroying evidence, however, is actually a crime. And if Joe Biden pardons them, then he is merely covering up a deeper injustice and perversion of the justice system under his watch, which we already know he doesn't really give a shit about. So there we go. Now, Biden, of course, has nothing to lose at this point, as he is absolutely detested by everyone, including his own party. So there we go. Anyway. All right. Well, it's not just the January 6th committee, by the way. It's not just the Russia hoaxers, by the way. It also could come down that the sale of the border wall that the Biden administration is attempting to do could also be considered an illegal act. What am I talking about? Wait a minute. What's going on here? How would that be illegal? Well, let me just leave it to good old Ted Cruz, who is a lawyer, to explain. So Cruz, this in the Daily Wire, Cruz signals that Trump DOJ might prosecute Biden officials selling border wall materials. Now, he was talking on Monday night that this was last night, that officials in the Biden administration who are involved in selling off the border wall construction materials before President Trump takes office should expect to be criminally prosecuted by the Department of Justice. He says, and to quote, "This is one of the most offensive things I've ever seen. Let me give you an analogy. Let's say that you're a sheriff. You're an elected sheriff, and you get beat. You get beaten. So there's a new sheriff coming into office, and let's say that you have 10 squad cars that cost $50,000 apiece. And on your last week in office, you decide, I'm going to sell the squad cars for $100 each because I hate the sheriff that beat me. And I want to make sure the new sheriff has no squad cars." He continues and says, let me tell you what that is. That is theft of government resources. Let me be very clear to every official at the Department of Homeland Security or anywhere else who approves selling off incredibly expensive portions of the border wall for $5 apiece. You are engaged in theft of government property. And you should expect the Department of Justice to investigate you and prosecute you. Yeah. I never even really thought about that. But that is an interesting angle. That is a very interesting angle. If they don't have authorization, let's say, for disposal of those pieces of perfectly good border wall, then that's kind of interesting. That is interesting to to point out. I never even considered that angle, but it is true. I mean, that would basically be theft of government property. If they don't have authorization to sell it off for whatever reason or get rid of it. That's an interesting angle. And I wouldn't have thought of that way. Well, there's another Democrat individual, Democrat-oriented individual who is also a little scared about what's going on and what could be coming down the pike from the Trump administration. That individual, now granted, he is a TDS, which is Trump derangement syndrome sufferer in the worst way. Okay. But it's kind of interesting the tack that he is taking here and in his comments about what he thinks may happen, because I seem to recall Barack Obama actually using the IRS to go after conservative nonprofits back when Obama was in charge. It's almost as though these Democrats are sitting here thinking, well, we can do it, but you can't. You can't. Well, here it is. This in the Daily Fetched. Reid Hoffman, who is a TDS sufferer and a huge mega donor for the Democrats. He's a billionaire tech mogul and like I said, mega donor. He fears that Donald Trump is going to weaponize the IRS against him for donating to Kamala Harris. During an appearance on the Diary of a CEO podcast, Hoffman whined that Trump would weaponize the IRS and other government institutions to target him. That's exactly what the Democrats did. Not only to Trump, but have also done to Elon Musk, who is a billionaire as well, who supports Trump. So in other words, you moronic Democrats, you're back to the whole thing of, well, yeah, rules for thee, but not for me in this entire situation. So Hoffman reportedly has plowed millions of dollars into Democrat causes and candidates, all the while spewing lies about and against Trump. Hoffman's growing paranoia about Trump's return to power isn't unfounded. He said when asked about the consequences for his financial support of Harris, Hoffman lamented, quote, "Well, I think there is a greater than 50% chance that there will be repercussions from a misdirection and corruption of the institutions of state to respond to my having tried to help Harris get elected. You think maybe you shouldn't have gone after him first, utilizing the IRS like you guys did?" Anyway, Hoffman also said that Trump could target him through IRS audits. And he says, "I hope it's only in soft ends of the range, like IRS audits or phone calls, like Trump made saying, deny Bezos that DOD contract because he owns the Washington Post and I don't like him. It could get much worse, but I don't really want to speculate on it because I don't want to give anybody any ideas." You mean kind of like ABC? Maybe you get sued for, whatever. Anyway. Yeah. So, Hoffman apparently has ties to convicted sex offender and former financier Jeffrey Epstein. Hoffman's relationship with Epstein came under the spotlight after Tesla CEO Elon Musk insinuated he visited Epstein's private island and responded with the 100% emoji. Musk also told Tucker Carlson that Hoffman was terrified of the Epstein client list being made public. Will the list ever come, you think? Tucker Carlson asked Elon Musk, and Elon responded with, part of why Kamala is getting so much support is that if Trump wins, the Epstein client list is going to become public. Musk continues and says, and some of those billionaires behind Kamala are terrified of that outcome. Tucker specifically asked the billionaire LinkedIn founder, do you think Reid Hoffman's uncomfortable? Elon Musk said yes, and Bill Gates. Now, Hoffman called Musk's claims defamation and blamed his public comments for a spike in threats against them. And it's kind of interesting about the government weaponization that he's so scared about, despite the fact that Joe Biden has been going after Trump allies, from Steve Bannon all the way up to Peter Navarro. So, yeah, Democrats, there's a lot of them that are running scared. They're running scared, as they should be. Now, let's just hope that when Trump gets into office that he actually goes after these people. Okay? One last thing that I want to comment about in terms of the whole idea of birthright citizenship. So Trump, of course, announced birthright citizenship was potentially on the chopping block, that he was going to try and find a way to redefine what that actually means. And believe it or not, there's actually a lot of support for it. I'm kind of surprised about it. But there is a lot of people who, according to Just the News here, there's a lot of people who are border hawks They are backing Trump's idea to end birthright citizenship, despite the fact that it is likely to end up in front of SCOTUS. So, Representative Tim Burchett of Tennessee, on Monday's edition of Just the News, No Noise, said what happens is these folks come across our border, then they have a child here, and then they are in turn where the baby sponsors them. It's just a racket. The system we had in place is not great. So at present, the current, again, interpretation of the 14th Amendment is basically that anyone born within the borders of the United States is entitled to U.S. citizenship. And that interpretation of the law has given rise to a number of questionable practices, including the travel of pregnant women to the United States and territories in order to give birth to get the rights of those kids bestowed upon their children, okay, or to get the rights bestowed upon their children. Now, this is also why illegal immigrants, illegal aliens come across the border to have anchor babies to get born in the country so they stay here in the country. Now, the thing about it is that the 14th Amendment actually has the secondary provision in it, as I have pointed out on this program, where it states, all persons born or naturalized in the United States, and here's the qualifier, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. That's the qualifier. And as I've pointed out, that particular qualifier actually means that they can't be citizens or be born to parents of citizens of another country, because those parents who are citizens of another country are not subject to the laws of the United States necessarily. So this whole concept of being able to come here as a guest of our country, have a baby, and have it automatically, just because it was born here, have it automatically become an American citizen is ludicrous. One of the parents must be an American citizen in order for that baby to be an American citizen, under what would be the proper interpretation of the idea that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. That's the part and is the basis for Trump and his team doing the preferred interpretation that foreign tourists and illegal aliens are not arguably subject to Washington's, meaning Washington, D.C., Washington's jurisdiction, and therefore are not covered by the text of the amendment. It's almost certain to make it to the Supreme Court, I'm sure. But I personally hope that that does make it to the Supreme Court, and I hope they qualify it. I really do. Because that right there is, I mean, it pretty much means a hell of a lot, to be honest with you. All right, folks, that is it for me for this evening. Do me a favor, if you haven't already, head on over to rumble.com, get yourself an account. It is free. Once you are signed up and signed in, make sure that you search up the American Perspective channel in order to get, and press that green follow button in order to get notified every time that I go live. Also, too, don't forget to hit all of those thumbs up and like buttons across all of my platforms, whether it is X, YouTube, Facebook, and, of course, the aforementioned Rumble. We will see you tomorrow night, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on American Perspective for Whiskey Wednesday. Have a great rest of your evening, and good night, everybody.
The previous broadcast was produced and is owned by Active Eye Media LLC. All rights reserved.